We started the service with some words from Mary Oliver. The poem is entitled, Why I Wake Early. It's a recognition from the very beginning that from the beginning of her day, she sees God at work, although God is not named, it is the Creator. And so our creed unfolds, we believe in God, who has created and is creating. She wrote, Hello, sun in my face. Hello, you who make the morning and spread it over the fields and into the faces of the tulips and the nodding morning glories and into the windows of even the miserable and the crotchety. Best preacher that ever was, dear star that just happens to be where you are in the universe, to keep us from ever darkness, to ease us with warm touching, to hold us in the great hands of light. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Watch now how I start the day in happiness, in kindness. Mary Oliver was 83 when she died in early of 2019. Last week we heard from the young Black American poet, Amanda Gorman. Today, an older American still in that wonderful tradition of speaking to us across time. As Larry and Bullwinkle were talking, the United Church has creeds, as every church has. And from time to time, our creed has changed to reflect the changing context. Since our denomination is close to 100 years old, having been born in 1925, with its first creedal statement being contained in the Act of Parliament that gave us birth, and it's called the Basis of Union, 1925. Then, during the Second World War, the second statement of faith came out. Changed times called for changed language and incorporating new understandings of how people saw God at work in their lives, how they wanted to express that, and what was working and what wasn't working with earlier expressions. Lent is a time which invites us to do the same spiritual work, to find the language and the images to express what we understand and our questions about God in our hearts, in our lives, in our world. And then in 1968, another creed came out. And that's the one we've been talking about and we'll talk about this Lent, what we call the New Creed, although as you can see, it's not new at all. And then about 15 years ago, another statement came out, and it's called A Song of Faith. And it's as different from our New Creed of 1968 as the New Creed is from the Basis of Union statement of 1925. Each one of these statements reflects the changing context. If you were to read your own journal from what you wrote about your spiritual self when you were a teenager in high school, it might not even seem recognizable to you. And then you'll come across a phrase and you go, you know, I still believe that to be true. And so that's how it's been with the church. Old language not reflecting, and then the kernel that says yes, yes. And so when the new committee in the 15 years ago edition, the Song of Faith, began to look at the creed, of course, they ran into this very popular new creed. Marty Tyndall, who was the moderator, said, you know, I taught my children to memorize that. We use it as grace before meals because I wanted them to have that as, and this isn't her phrase, but as a moral compass. That sense of, as Bullwinkle was saying, succinct, concise language. But no creed in the church has ever been easy to put together. And the new creed in the 60s is no exception to that. And it's kind of a very interesting chapter of the history of our church. So it all started, interestingly enough, with a baptismal service to be included in a new book of service that was going to be issued for ministers. And in that old service from the older book, the Apostles' Creed was referenced. And some people on that committee thought, actually not many people really use that language, feel those images anymore of the Apostles' Creed. Maybe we should find some new language that expresses more closely what people in the United Church of Canada in the early 1960s actually used for language and imagery of their own held theology. And that was the beginning of the new creed as we've got it, to put something in a baptismal service that would reflect the lived experience of a whole new generation of United Church of Canada. Now, you can imagine how hard it would be to come up with a statement. And so many people suggested what would be a good creed. And then a professor at Victoria College in Toronto, Mac Freeman was his name, came up with an outline that suddenly resonated with the committee. And it began, I believe that man is not alone. God has created and is creating us. God has worked in history and is working to liberate us for true humanity and community. God has come among us in the true man, Jesus, and comes among us today in the spirit of our risen Lord to deliver us from alienation from God, our fellows, and ourselves. God has called and is calling us into the company of Jesus, with whom we are chosen to be servants, by whom others are set free. Man is not alone. In life, in death, in life beyond death, we are in the presence of God, believing that we are offered life and liberation from beyond our human resources. I trust God and commit my existence to His purpose. It was Mac Freeman. Mac went on to teach in the University at Queen's in Kingston in the Department of Education and died last January at a great old age. Have you ever been part of a group of parents wanting to write on one card when a teacher's retiring and you've gathered in a space and the cake is ready and the person comes with the card and you each have a phrase you want to put in about what they were like as a teacher for your children, and then suddenly at the door somebody says, "Hey, we got 3 minutes to get this written. Decide what you're going to put it down and do it now." Every creed in the history of the church, I believe, has somebody at the door with their finger on a watch or the equivalent saying, you've got to make some choices. And certainly that happened with the new creed. And that somebody was a man named Don Mathers at Queen's University. And he said, if you want to have that in front of General Council, our deciding body, by the meeting in Kingston in '68, you need to have it done sooner than you're thinking. And suddenly with that bit of heat underneath the pot of their dialogue, they continued to talk. And it wasn't easy. As you can hear from Mac Freeman's suggestion, much of that language continues to this day, but there was a lot of back and forth. And the back and forth is important. It's like in a family conversation about God or about Christ or the Spirit, or even anything about angels, and we want to listen to everybody. We want to hear what they're saying. But eventually, they came up with a potential solution, presented it to all those delegates gathered in Kingston that summer. The people presenting it were very nervous, and if ever you get a chance to empathize, you can imagine what it's like to be the person presenting a new creed in front of a room full of ministers in the 60s. You know, I'm sure they were all there with their clerical collars. But after they received it, and they did, they said, well, we'll go ahead with this, but you've got more work to do. You can imagine the committee must have wanted to roll their eyes, but they wanted to have it have it worked on a bit more, that it could be ready for the booklet and ready for the service book, and a true expression of what the church believed. And that's the Lenten journey for us all. How do we express our faith? It may be through images, too deep for words. It may be through looking up into the boughs of a Douglas fir and feeling something deep within you that you can only acknowledge is a spiritual, sacred moment, but for which you have no words. A creed attempts to take all those experiences and offer some words. The Song of Faith is very, very poetic, but much longer than the New Creed of 1968. And so it's been changed a bit more as we've changed. Our spirituality changes with us as we grow and evolve. And it became clear that man is not alone. All those images, we wanted to make them inclusive. Apparently in the 1980 General Council that was accepted. And then a couple of decades later, I guess in the 90s, they added the phrase that Bullwinkle loves, to live with respect in creation. Because a creed is never really finished in the United Church. The new one is always kind of in process, underneath and around us. And so we have this beautiful document from 1968, which many of us would agree with former moderator Marty Tyndall, that it is a guide for us, easily memorized. And it's one of those things that we can pull out when we're struggling. The gift of a memorized phrase from the Creed: who is creating, has created, God is with us. These are strong phrases that can really help us when we're struggling. And we'll talk more about this creed, but in the meantime, I would invite you to think about the lesson you heard today. God is love, and that we are invited to live in love. The poem Mary Oliver talked about, "Hello, you who made the morning," and how that affected her day. She invites the sacred spirit, watch now how I live in kindness, how we live out our values. It's not unimportant what we believe. Lent is a chance for us to take the time to sort through that. Because best preacher that ever was Mother Nature for her, the expression of God in all those images that we saw at the beginning. Watch now. What will we see as we watch each other start our days? A new month beckons. Lent moves forward. Spring continues to unfold here in the southern part of Vancouver Island. Creeds have the reputation of being dry, but they give us a chance to open ourselves to exploring all the wonders of our own spiritual relationship, and that is far from dry. That is life-giving. I wanted to close with another little one of Mary Oliver's poems. She said in the poem, When Death Comes, she said, "When it's over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride, married to amazement. I was the bridegroom, taking the world into my arms. May it be so for us. Amen."